when you hear about it, so it's like a good mix between the two. So get cozy and let's dive into today's case. So, on the afternoon of Monday, 23rd August 2010, Metropolitan Police Officer PC John Gallagher arrived at an address in Pimlico, London, which is an affluent district renowned for its elegant Georgian and Victorian architecture. It was approximately 4:40 p.m. and PC Gallagher met a letting agent outside number 36 Alderney Street, which was a former townhouse that had been converted into a block of apartments to rent. PC Gallagher and the letting agent entered the building together and climbed up to the top floor, which was flat number 4. PC Gallagher had been asked to carry out a welfare check after one of the tenant's colleagues reported them missing. According to the colleague, Gareth Williams had failed to attend work for more than a week without any explanation. But this was no ordinary missing person investigation. Gareth Williams was a codebreaker for MI6. If you're not familiar with MI6, it's basically the UK's version of the CIA. It's the secret intelligence service. Gareth's unexplained disappearance raised concerns not only for his personal safety, but also for potential national security implications. After unlocking the apartment, the letting agent remained outside whilst PC Gallagher went in alone. Initially, nothing appeared especially unusual. The flat was neat and orderly, with no immediate indication that anything was wrong or had happened there. However, as he continued searching, several details caught his attention. There was a woman's wig rested over a chair. On a nearby table sat a mobile phone that had been reset to factory settings, alongside several SIM cards, and despite it being a warm summer afternoon, the apartment's radiators were turned up very high, and the apartment was boiling hot. It was like a sauna in there. PC Gallagher continued upstairs, as this was a split-level apartment, where he eventually entered the ensuite bathroom. And inside the bathtub, there was a bright red North Face holdall bag, like the kind you would take on a trip with you for a few days, you know. It was sat in the bath, and the zips had been padlocked shut. And when PC Gallagher attempted to lift the bag, it was very, very heavy, and he struggled to pick it up, but as he did, he noticed a foul odour escape into the room, and then red liquid started leaking from the bottom of the bag. Realising the seriousness of the situation, PC Gallagher called for assistance. When officers came and they eventually managed to cut the bag open, they found sister and was never known to be romantically involved with anyone, but he was like a physical fitness guy and enjoyed cycling, so that's kind of the only thing they knew outside of work that he got up to. So that's just a bit of background about Gareth, but now back to the scene of finding him in this bag in his bathtub. By the time the police discovered his body, decomposition was already well advanced, indicating that he may have died nearly 2 weeks before they found him. Gareth was about 5'7" tall, and he had been folded into this bag so tightly that officers initially believed that his limbs must have been severed in order to fit him inside. They found the key to the padlock in the bag underneath his body, despite the fact that the padlock is obviously on the outside, securing the zips shut. There were no objects inside the bag that could have helped him escape, such as scissors or a knife or anything, and investigators found remarkably little evidence of a struggle of him trying to escape the bag. There weren't any deep scratches on the fabric, and there were no significant injuries suggesting a desperate attempt to force his way out. Although later examinations identified minor abrasions on his arm, pathologists could not agree whether they were caused while attempting to escape. The post-mortem examination found no evidence that Gareth had been stabbed, strangled, or beaten. Tests also revealed no alcohol or recreational drugs in his system. Forensic specialists screened for more than 100 different toxic substances, all of which returned negative results. However, investigators acknowledged that decomposition may have prevented certain substances from being detected. Because he had been there for approximately 2 weeks, it could have been way out of his system by now. They did find 2 unidentified DNA profiles on the padlock, but neither could be linked to a known individual. And elsewhere in the apartment, investigators found very little evidence of a disturbance. Apart from the ensuite bathroom, the flat remained generally tidy, and there was no indication that a burglary or a theft had taken place. The main bedroom was largely untouched except for the duvet, which was found on the floor. In the second bedroom, officers found another North Face bag, and the wardrobe contained over £15,000 worth of women's designer clothing, including 6 unopened boxes containing unworn garments. Downstairs, a green bathroom towel was lying on the kitchen floor that carried DNA from another unidentified individual. In the living room, police recovered women's cosmetics, the red wig, the reset mobile phone, and several SIM cards, as well as various letters and paperwork. There was a newspaper clipping titled "The Top 5 Regrets of the Dying." Investigators found no signs of forced entry and no damage to the windows. However, they did discover that the apartment door, the front door of the apartment, had been double locked from the outside using a key, something that could not be done from inside the flat because of the lock's design. So, there was definitely someone that locked the door outside. He couldn't have locked it like that himself, being inside the apartment. Finally, officers remained puzzled by the heating, because daytime temperatures in London at this point were around 20 degrees Celsius, but every radiator in the apartment was turned up was seen at approximately 2:30 p.m. outside Harrods in Hans Crescent. He was then filmed walking towards Sloane Street, close to the Dolce & Gabbana store. And this would become the final confirmed sighting of Gareth Williams alive. From that point onwards, his movements remain unknown. Gareth failed to report for work on Monday the 16th of August and did not return during the rest of the week. But despite his unexplained absence, he was not officially reported missing until Monday the 23rd of August, an entire week later, when colleagues eventually alerted the police. And although the CCTV footage from the 15th of August is the last confirmed evidence of Gareth alive, several witnesses later claimed that they had seen him after that date. Staff at a nearby patisserie reported that a man matching Gareth's description spent several consecutive days working on a laptop at the rear of the cafe. According to employees, he remained there for hours at a time and was regularly joined by different visitors who would sit with him briefly before leaving again. Although investigators could never verify the man's identity, cafe staff remained convinced that it was Gareth Williams. Another possible sighting emerged from Thursday, 19th of August, when Gareth was reportedly seen attending a drag cabaret performance in London. But like the cafe reports, this sighting was never confirmed. Although officers did discover tickets in his apartment for 2 future drag performances, which obviously lends some support to the fact that he may have been at a drag event prior to the last confirmed CCTV. Within days of discovering Gareth's body, the initial post-mortem findings were returned, and frustratingly they came back as inconclusive. There were no fatal injuries, no evidence of poisoning, and no obvious physical trauma capable of explaining how Gareth had died. Nevertheless, many experts believed that Gareth had entered the bag while still alive and may have even been conscious after the bag was sealed shut. According to their reconstruction, once the heavy bag had been zipped shut, conditions inside would have deteriorated rapidly. Within approximately 3 minutes, temperatures inside the bag would have exceeded 30 degrees Celsius, and as oxygen levels steadily fell and carbon dioxide accumulated, Gareth would have eventually lost consciousness before dying from suffocation, likely within around 30 minutes. This theory also appeared broadly consistent with the absence of any injuries and the relatively limited evidence of any prolonged struggle. The investigation then shifted towards questioning whether Gareth could have placed himself inside the bag. If so, was it an elaborate, unalarming attempt, or some form of dangerous experiment gone catastrophically wrong? And at this stage, the case took an unexpected turn. Media reports about this case began focusing heavily on Gareth's private life, with widespread speculation surrounding both his sexuality and personal interests. Some newspapers claimed investigators had discovered BDSM equipment, Class A drugs, and evidence that male escorts had visited Gareth's apartment. Those reports were later shown to be unsubstantiated. Police did confirm, however, that Gareth's internet history included searches relating to bondage and sadomasochism. Combined with the red wig, the collection of women's clothing, and his apparent interest in drag performances, investigators considered whether Gareth may have been secretly cross-dressing and participating in sexual practices investigators found no evidence linking those interests directly to his death. There was one incident from his past that did complicate matters, though. A former landlady recalled hearing Gareth shouting for help one night. When she entered his apartment, she reportedly found him partially undressed and tied to his bed. According to her statement, Gareth explained that he had been simply testing whether he could free himself from the restraints. Some investigators accepted that explanation, but others believed that Gareth had invented that story to avoid revealing the true purpose of the exercise. Police considered this earlier incident significant, believing it supported the idea that Gareth had an interest in escapology or bondage. It also appeared to provide a possible explanation for the women's clothing found inside the apartment. Investigators believed the expensive designer clothing may have been purchased during Gareth's shopping trip shortly before his disappearance. Some even suggested the clothes appeared to be in his size. But there was another possible interpretation. It later emerged that Gareth had attended 2 fashion design courses during 2009 and 2010, and the women who taught those classes confirmed that Gareth had regularly attended. Shop assistants also told investigators that whenever Gareth purchased women's clothing, he often explained that it was intended for his girlfriend. His sister gave evidence to the inquest, stating that she believed Gareth was heterosexual and that she was confident he would have confided in her had that not been the case. Ultimately, none of this speculation answered the main mystery. If Gareth had climbed into the bag voluntarily, how did he manage to lock it? And that single question has remained at the heart of the Gareth Williams mystery ever since. Even if investigators accepted that Gareth willingly climbed into the bag, one seemingly impossible obstacle remained. How could he have secured the padlock once he was trapped inside? His former landlady's account suggested that he had previously experimented with escape techniques, leading some to believe that he simply may have attempted another challenge that went disastrously wrong. Even so, many found that explanation difficult to reconcile with his character. Gareth was widely regarded as exceptionally intelligent, meticulous, and naturally cautious. If he had deliberately undertaken such a dangerous experiment, even purely for curiosity, it seemed reasonable to expect that he would have some sort of safety mechanism just in case things went wrong. And the way his body had been compressed inside the bag also raised further doubts. His limbs were folded so tightly that investigators initially believed that they must have been severed before discovering otherwise. To many observers, the positioning appeared more consistent with someone placing him in the bag rather than Gareth getting in and contorting himself in such a small space. And then the padlock is another major problem because it was attached to the outside of the bag. How on earth could Gareth have done this himself? So of course, many investigators believed that the most logical explanation was that another person had placed Gareth and the key inside the bag before locking it externally. To examine whether self-confinement was even possible, forensic specialists attempted to recreate the circumstances. 2 volunteers of a similar height and build to Gareth repeatedly tried to climb into an identical bag and secure it from within. Despite carrying out more than 300 attempts to do this, they failed every single time. Their conclusion was blunt. In their opinion, believed those same marks could instead have been caused while Gareth attempted to escape from inside the bag. The disagreement reflected a wider pattern throughout the investigation. Almost every important piece of evidence seemed capable of supporting more than one interpretation. Some experts suggested that Gareth might have been incapacitated before being placed in the bag. Certain substances, including cyanide, chloroform, and some anesthetic agents, may not have been detectable by the time the post-mortem took place because of the advanced state of decomposition. Another possibility was that Gareth entered the bag under threat. If confronted by an armed attacker, investigators speculated he may have complied rather than risk immediate violence. There was also the question of forensic evidence. Investigators believed Gareth could not realistically have climbed into the bag unaided without leaving fingerprints or footprints around the bath. Because there were no prints in the bathroom, it was spotless, which of course led to speculation that any evidence left behind had been deliberately wiped clean before whoever did this left the apartment. Despite considering numerous possible scenarios, the three pathologists involved in the post-mortem examination were unable to reach a unanimous conclusion regarding the precise cause of death. Even so, all agreed that on the balance of probabilities, the evidence pointed more towards an unlawful killing than an accident. The next challenge was identifying who might have been responsible. At first, detectives had virtually nothing to work with. No obvious suspects emerged, no clear motive presented itself, and no murder weapon was recovered. Several months into the investigation, police publicly released an ephod depicting a man and woman that they wished to identify. The pair were believed to be in their mid-20s and were described as having a Mediterranean appearance, and they had reportedly visited Garrett's apartment in the months before his death. According to witnesses, they arrived at 36 Alderney Street in late June. After another resident allowed them into the building, the couple explained that they possessed keys to Garrett's flat and were there to visit someone that they called Pierre Paolo. They then headed upstairs to the top floor apartment, and no one reported seeing them leave. Investigators were never able to determine whether Pierre Paolo was a genuine individual or perhaps an alias. Given Garrett's role within the intelligence service, some considered it entirely plausible that he may have used false identities when necessary. His family, however, found another aspect particularly troubling. They insisted it would have been completely out of character for Gareth to entrust anyone else with a key to his apartment. Despite appeals to the public, no significant new information ever emerged regarding the unidentified couple. Eventually, detectives acknowledged that they might never discover who they were and quietly abandoned efforts to trace them. As the criminal investigation continued, an inquest was convened to examine the circumstances surrounding Gareth Williams' death. Coroners heard evidence from forensic specialists, police officers, intelligence personnel, and family members in an effort to establish what happened. Rather than providing answers, however, the proceedings exposed a series of unexpected failures that only deepened the mystery. More than 40 members of the intelligence service, including employees from both MI6 and GCHQ, were interviewed. Among the many unanswered questions, one issue stood out above all the others. Gareth had failed to arrive at work on Monday, 16th of August, and he remained absent throughout the entire week, or supervisors until a week later. It was only after Gareth's sister contacted his workplace to express concern about his welfare that anyone took any meaningful action, and even then events unfolded surprisingly slowly. His sister called his office at approximately 11:30 a.m, but police were not asked to carry out a welfare check until roughly 5 hours later. Gareth lived only a short distance from his workplace at MI6 headquarters, so in theory, someone from his workplace could have walked to his apartment within minutes to check whether he was safe. When questioned about the apparent lack of urgency, Gareth's line manager, identified during proceedings only as Witness G, said he had initially assumed Gareth had simply experienced travel difficulties. Reflecting on the decision later, he admitted, "Knowing what I know now, should I have taken action? Absolutely." For many, that statement only fueled suspicion that something far more significant had occurred behind the scenes. Whether those concerns reflected a genuine cover-up or simple institutional incompetence has never been conclusively established. What is certain is that the investigation itself suffered from a series of costly mistakes. As the inquest continued, further problems with the investigation began to emerge, raising fresh questions about how such an important case had been handled. One promising piece of forensic evidence quickly unravelled. DNA recovered from Gareth Williams' hand was initially treated as a potentially significant lead. However, investigators later discovered that the sample had been contaminated by one of the forensic officers who had attended the scene. An administrative error had resulted in the DNA being incorrectly labelled, effectively eliminating what had once appeared to be valuable evidence. Another mistake proved even more frustrating. The front door to Gareth's apartment, along with its lock, had been removed from the property before forensic specialists were able to carry out a full examination. As a result, investigators lost the opportunity to recover potentially crucial evidence relating to entry, exit, and fingerprints. Then, just 2 days before the inquest concluded, another revelation surfaced. 9 USB memory sticks that belonged to Gareth had been discovered at his MI6 office that had not been disclosed earlier. The intelligence service apologised for the oversight, though the late disclosure only added to growing criticism of the investigation. Outside the courtroom, Gareth Williams' family and their legal representatives remained convinced that he had not died by accident. They argued that the circumstances pointed towards a professionally executed killing, one carried out by individuals trained in the methods of the intelligence world. But despite those arguments, the case took another controversial the same time as Garrett's death, Britain experienced a series of suspicious deaths involving intelligence figures, defectors, and individuals linked to Russian interests. Some researchers have suggested that as many as 14 cases between 2003 and 2016 shared possible connections to Russian intelligence operations. Perhaps the best known example is Alexander Litvinenko. Not sure if I'm pronouncing that right. A former KGB officer who had fled to Britain after accusing the Kremlin of corruption. Litvinenko died after ingesting radioactive polonium-210, allegedly administered in a cup of tea by 2 Russian operatives. His death became one of the most infamous suspected state-sponsored assassinations ever carried out on British soil. Over time, Gareth Williams' name was increasingly mentioned alongside other unexplained deaths that some commentators believed might also have involved Russian intelligence. No definitive evidence has ever proved such a connection. Nevertheless, reports later suggested that Gareth had been working on investigations concerning Russian interference, particularly allegations that organised crime groups based in Moscow were laundering money through international financial networks. Given Gareth's position within Britain's intelligence community, such work would not have been unusual. Some believe that if Gareth uncovered sensitive information relating to those operations, he may have become a target. One theory imagines the following sequence of events. After returning home from shopping on Sunday 15th, Gareth may have encountered 2 Russian operatives waiting for him. Rather than forcing entry, they could have persuaded or compelled him to let them inside his home at gunpoint. And once inside the apartment, they may have questioned him about intelligence concerning Russian criminal networks before forcing him to erase data from his mobile phone. Believing he knew too much, they allegedly decided to eliminate him. Supporters of this theory suggest Gareth may first have been drugged or poisoned using a substance that later escaped forensic detection. With him unable to resist, the attackers would have placed him inside the North Face bag, put it in the bath, and carefully positioned his body inside it. By avoiding unnecessary force, they would minimize visible injuries and create the impression that Gareth had entered the bag voluntarily. After placing the padlock key inside the bag, they could have then secured the zip externally. And before leaving, every accessible surface would have been cleaned to remove fingerprints and other forensic traces. The unusual items found throughout the apartment, the women's clothing, the wig, the reset mobile phone, the SIM cards, and the newspaper clipping, may have been deliberately arranged to mislead investigators and encourage theories involving unaliving attempts or a fatal sexual experiment. The heating could then have been turned up in an attempt to accelerate decomposition and reduce the chances of detecting poison or recovering forensic evidence. Finally, the perpetrators would have left the apartment, locking the front door behind them before disappearing without a trace. But that just remains a theory. There has been no confirmation or evidence that have conclusively identified these events as taking place. More than 15 years later, Gareth Williams' death remains one of Britain's most perplexing unsolved mysteries. The secretive nature of his work means that some of the information surrounding his final days may never have been made public, leaving open the possibility that the complete truth will remain hidden indefinitely. Now, I don't know about you, but in my mind, there's no way that someone that works for MI6 is doing this whole whole elaborate thing by themselves. It's just impossible. The entire place is clean of any DNA, even of his own. So you're telling me he went on a cleaning spree, somehow managed to double lock the door from the outside, even though that's not possible. So what is he asked, like a neighbour, can you come round and lock my door from the outside? Got himself in a bag that's really difficult to fit himself in. Managed to padlock it on the outside, or to do it himself. I don't think so. Not at all. I think it's very clear that this was professionally done. And they were very, very skilled in leaving no evidence behind, confusing a situation. I mean, the fact that they left the heating on to decompose the body faster, which would mean that traces of drugs or any substance would not be found. It's very clear that this was a professional killing, and that Gareth's line of work was clearly a very dangerous one. I think all this stuff about, you know, the woman's wig and the women's clothing, in my mind, yeah, okay, maybe he was gay, maybe he was cross-dressing, that's definitely possible. But also what popped to my mind was it could have been part of some undercover assignment he was on, you know, like, I'm sure they do all kinds of different types of undercover jobs that might need to involve going to gay bars, going to drag shows, you know, like fitting into a certain crowd. So, you know, that could very well have been what was going on there. As for him supposedly calling out to his landlady and saying that he needed help getting out from the bed, like being tied to the bed, that is interesting. And I wonder, part of me wonders if that was done on purpose, like maybe he wanted her to think that this was his life, because again he's trying to go undercover in this world. Do you know what I mean? I don't know. None of that really matters. I think it's just very, very clear that he was professionally taken out, and it's not surprising that the evidence is all confusing, and the Metropolitan Police like didn't do a very good job, and you know, mislabeled things, and of course they did. Like, they answered to MI6 and MI5, like, of course they do. You know, they are not, even though they're the Metropolitan Police, which is like the top police department in the country, they still answer to agencies that are much higher than them, as we all know. So yeah, I think it's very clear what happened here. And, well, not like by who, but that this was not done by himself. I think it's very, very clear it was done to him. But yeah, still mind-boggling, and I just feel so bad for him, because he was clearly very intelligent and could have continued to contribute to the safeguarding of my country. You know, it's just so sad when someone who had amazing talents, to see that taken away, and it's probably over something ridiculous. Yeah, it's very, very sad. And I really do hope that before he was put in the bag that he was unconscious, or possibly already dead, because I can't imagine suffocating inside a bag. I hope that that did not happen to him, and I don't think, in my mind, I think he's been given some sort of substance that's taken him out beforehand. weird, like, elaborate thing to, like, put him up in a bag in his own apartment and then leave him there, like, but I guess where he was situated it would have been difficult to remove his body from the building without causing suspicion from other people, so I guess this was maybe their only option. I don't know, but it's such a head scratcher, this one, so let me know what you think it may have happened here. If you know any more information than I've shared, let me know. I hope you enjoyed this video, you guys. I'm sorry that the last video sound quality wasn't as good. Hopefully this one is better. Okay, thank you so much for watching.